of people's younger days.
Yeah, well, and not just younger, but we often talk about it's like these special times in our life that stand out, and most of the time it is younger.
That's why I hear people say it. That's why I
yeah,
say that.
yeah, and it is too, and we do too. Whether we realize it or not. I can remember when I first got married, and I started working in a daycare in North Carolina, and finally we were all younger. I mean, I was young. I think I was 18 or 19, and didn't know very much. And finally, one girl in the daycare came to me. She goes, "I'm so sick of hearing about Maine. If you like it so much there, move back." Apparently, those were my glory days back in Maine. But so and it was good. It was a good lesson for me. It was like, oh, and it's very true. Over the years, Pastor and I we had particularly one instance where the person just kept talking about another church that they went to, and it was like, I'm glad you love your church. That's great, but you're here now. And it brought me back to that time when she said, "You live in North Carolina." And I'm, whoa, okay. So, but talk about glory days. It was when things were good. Maybe we had good health, or we were in our prime, or maybe it was when we had a spouse with us. And maybe it was when we lived there or we worked here, just basically good times you look back on. And those are memories that we revisit. And it's not saying it's bad to have memories, but sometimes, we bask in the joy that those memories bring. But I want to talk today about, but what if every day became a glory day?
Awesome.
What if every single day that we wake up, we purpose to make it a glory day? Not just, those were the years, those were the times, those were, that was the place to live. That was a better life back then. No, but on purpose. And we talk so much about living the Christian life on purpose. And it's because if we don't, we do not even touch the surface of the life that God has for us. But it is such a purposeful life. And in so many ways, it's such a disciplined life. And I think therein lies the problem. Most of us are not disciplined. Why? Because we have this stuff, the flesh, and it's hard to be disciplined. It's hard. And that's why the Bible talks about it, dying to ourself, crucifying the flesh on a regular daily basis. I need to die to myself because the flesh says, you don't have to be disciplined. You can start it tomorrow, whatever that is, And so it's very easy to be undisciplined, and it's very hard to be disciplined. But I truly believe, I'm not saying I can speak from experience, but I truly believe the disciplined life is the better life because you're doing things on purpose and with a goal in your mind. And ours, I want us to think about today, is to make every single day that we wake up a glory day. And maybe it's going to be putting a reminder somewhere, like when you first open your eyes, or on the fridge, or mine would be on the coffee maker. Where I first see it, and just make a purposeful choice. God is our Father, and He wants the absolute very best for us. And I think we often forget that too. God does not mean for our Christian life to be one that we sorrow in and that it's a burden to us. Right. That is not the kind of life that God has for us as Christians. But too many times, I think we live a defeated Christian life. Why? Goes back to not being disciplined, I think. Not living on purpose, not purposefully finding out what His Word says and obeying it. Because that's where the victory lies. That's where the joy is. It's in obedience to Christ. When my kids were young, and I can only talk about what I know about, but when my kids were young, they were the happiest when they were being obedient. When they were being disobedient to us, there was a price to pay. There was a consequence to help them remember not to do that or to do that next time. And so it's the same way with us. We are God's children. We're, and on the same flip side, we have to remember we're joint heirs with Christ. We're God, God's our Father. We're His children, and we're joint heirs with Christ. It's a wonderful, wonderful thing to think about. But we do need to understand that God wants His best for us, and He's not that Father up in heaven just waiting for us to mess up so He can bonk us on the head and go, "Yep, did it again, schmack." That is not God.
I was thinking when you was saying that, like, the glory days or whatever, I was thinking, like, in my personal, I'm talking about just myself, like, my glory days, I guess you want to call it, is nothing compared to now.
No.
Like, I see it now, but then it's like, well, that's the best it was. But honestly, I'm a more calmer person, not so much of trying to fit in with everybody and do what they're doing instead of what I'm supposed to be doing.
And so many times, Jen, I think Christians, and we talk about ladies because we are ladies, Christian ladies, if I speak to someone older, and I can say older now because I am becoming older. I mean, that's just, I'm approaching 50. So I am getting older. I'm joining you older ones. How's that? Sorry.
There it is.
I couldn't help myself. So,
She said it with love.
but I think too many times what I find in talking is, I used to do this in the church. I used to be such an active, church member. I used to do this for the Lord. I used to do that. I used to. And we don't want to do that. That's living in the glory days, of our Christianity, and not making every day that we're living now a glory day. Now, it's still good to go back and say, those were good times. Makes me think of when we were we've been to a lot of different churches, Northwest, where Pastor went to Bible college, and he tells stories about the, working on the staff, and I worked in the Christian school, and I got some stories, and it just was a fun time in our life. It was a hard time, but it was a fun time and a growing time for us. And then I think of, when we served with Ed and Laura at Trinity, and we stayed there for 2 years, and what a joy to be around my family. And so, I can look at our time at Trinity. It's not saying you can't look back and be, like, those were good times, but don't live there. Don't spend all your time there and revisiting there, and don't
Wishing you were there.
and don't have a glory day today. So I want us to, we're going to look at a few biblical examples of living every day a glory day, and how they did it even amid difficult circumstances. And their stories we know, but it just helps to go over them. So we're going to turn to Esther. Esther and Ruth are my two favorite books. We're going to turn to Esther.
It's after Nehemiah, after the war.
Yeah, that's the
And
feel
it's
I
right
have
before
on that.
Job, I think.
I have to. Oh, I do it all the time. And I just was now too. I'm like, which way do I go? It's okay.
I knew Old
It's okay. It
Testament.
doesn't mean you don't know your Bible. It means sometimes I can't tell you my name. I know my name, but I just freeze up. It's okay. Or it slips me. Like, I have the worst time when I'm preparing my Sunday school lessons, remembering what I've already taught about. But I gave it to the Lord. I said, Lord, maybe you do this to me on purpose so that I'm just totally focused on whatever it is. And that's what I end up telling myself, because I don't bother looking back into the files. I just tell myself, okay, Lord, if this is a repeat even of last week, because it's foolish, I can't seem to remember last week's lesson. But maybe that's the way it's supposed to be. And I just say, okay, if it's a repeat in some form or other, then that's
There's
because that's
always-
what you
there's
want.
always Repeat, what is that?
Yep.
Repetition is the something.
The mother of
What he says.
mother of studies.
Yeah.
Yeah. My husband has said, as Brother Joe says.
Yeah, that's why I can hear Pastor saying it, that's why I said that.
I look at it as if you are repeating, somebody needs to hear.
And don't you feel like, I feel like this in teaching the Sunday school class, this is what it is. we are on repeat a lot, okay? We are on repeat a lot. It is read your Bible, pray, obey God, go to church, you know, and that's the premises, okay? And go to church goes back to obeying. Tithing goes back to obeying. It's the same principles over and over again, but we're human and we need them to apply to our life, you know, and so it helps to have lessons and messages and people helping direct us and understanding that the teachers probably need it more than the listeners do, you know. And we'll start right in with Esther. Just love this book. Esther chapter 2, and I'm not gonna read the whole chapter with this one. Starting with verses 5 to 9, it says, Now in Shushan, the palace, there was a certain Jew whose name was Mordecai, the son of Jair, the son of Shimei, the son of Kish, a Benjamite, who had been carried away from Jerusalem with the captivity which had been carried away with Jeconiah, king of Judah, whom Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, had carried away. And he brought up Hadassah.
That's a very interesting name.
Yeah. Who's Hadassah?
Esther.
Esther. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I actually just watched, Aaliyah had sent me a link to an interview, and it was a pastor's wife, and the daughter's name was Hadassah.
Oh.
Very pretty.
Neat.
And he brought up Hadassah, that is Esther,
Okay.
his uncle's daughter. So if it's his uncle's daughter, what did that make Esther to Mordecai?
His niece.
His uncle.
His uncle's?
His uncle's.
Oh,
I don't know.
Don't we think of it like uncle?
to nephew.
It's his uncle's.
Yeah, they're first cousins.
Yep. But we always think of, I mean, according to that, right? But we always think of Mordecai as her uncle. I always do. And yeah, still, if you catch me, you know, and I would still think that until I go back and read it again, and then it's like, actually, so that's pretty neat. For she had neither father nor mother, and the maid was fair and beautiful, whom Mordecai, when her father and mother were dead, took for his own daughter. So it came to pass when the king's commandment and his decree was heard, and when many maidens were gathered together unto Shushan the palace, to the custody of Haggai, that Esther was brought also into the king's house, to the custody of Haggai, keeper of the women. Verse 9, And the maiden pleased him, and she obtained kindness of him. And he speedily gave her things for her purification, with such things as belonged to her, and 7 maidens, which were meet to be given her out of the king's house. And he preferred her and her maids unto the best place of the house of the women. And then let's go to verses 15 and 17 there. Now when the turn of Esther, the daughter of Abihail, the uncle of Mordecai, who had taken her for his daughter, was come to go in unto the king, she required nothing. But when Haggai, the king's chamberlain, the keeper of the women, appointed, and Esther obtained favor in the sight of all them that looked upon her. So Esther was taken unto King Ahasuerus into his royal house in the 10th month, which is the month Tebeth, in the 7th year of his reign. Verse 17, And the king loved Esther above all the women, and she obtained grace and favor in his sight more than all the virgins. You're talking a lot of women here. So that he set the royal crown upon her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. Remember, Vashti refused to come before the king. Verse 18. Oh, no, we're going to stop there. Then we're going to go to chapter 4, verses 10 and 11. All the king's servants and the people of the king's provinces do know that whosoever, whether man or woman, shall come.
Where are you at? Chapter 4?
Chapter 4, dear.
11.
I was in 11, yeah, I need to start in 10. Again Esther spake unto Hatach, and gave him commandment unto Mordecai. All the king's servants and the people of the king's provinces do know that whosoever, whether man or woman, shall come unto the king into the inner court, who is not called, There is one law of his to put him to death, except such to whom the king shall hold out the golden scepter, that he may live. But I have not been called to come in unto the king these 30 days. And then verses 15 and 16 of chapter 4. Then, I'm going to read 14 just because it has a phrase I love. For if thou altogether holdest thy peace at this time, then shall there enlargement and deliverance arise to the Jews from another place. But thou and thy father's house shall be destroyed. And this is Mordecai talking to Esther. And who knoweth whether thou art come to the kingdom for such a time as this? And that's the phrase I just love. Verse 15. Then Esther bade them return Mordecai this answer. Go gather together all the Jews that are present in Shushan, and fast ye for me, and neither eat nor drink 3 days, night or day. I also and my maidens will fast likewise, and so will I go in unto the king, which is not according to the law. And if I perish, I perish. I love this book. I love this account that we're given. Guess what? Esther's life did not go as planned. Okay, she was made, I don't know if orphan's the right term because she did have family, but she lost her parents at a young age, and she thankfully did have a cousin who took her in and raised her as his own. But I don't know what that's like. I grew up with my parents. To lose your parents at such a young age seems like it would be so difficult. And then when she was older, she was taken from the family that she did know. And look at me. Look, she was taken from her uncle.
Mm-hmm.
See?
You always say
It's
that,
not.
that's why I thought that
Yeah,
was
it's
the
not. It's not the uncle. But that's just, I don't know. That's just what we always think. And she was put into the king's harem. Okay, so yes, it was really, really wonderful. And we're going to talk about, she had God's favor on her. But stop first and think how she was taken from her home, rounded up. I don't want to say like cattle, but it kind of feels that way. And I know that there was some allegiance, some loyalty, some specialness felt because you were chosen for the king's harem. But really, what you're doing, and I think we had a Sunday school lesson on it. I don't remember what it was about. But really, she left everything she knew. These women left their homes. They left everything they knew. And now their life was waiting in a house to see if the king would ever want them for a night or whatever.
If she was that beautiful, which she evidently was, according, to be chosen, and she was at that age, I wouldn't be surprised if there wasn't other fellas that she might have been interested in or that was interested in her.
Such a good point, Donna. Such a good point. So, when we read it, it's like, oh, lucky. Well, stop and really think this through. There are so many things. They went into a house, and yes, they got to live a beautiful home, especially when you're talking biblical times when they had a lot less, all that, and now they get to stay in a more beautiful home. But that's their life. That's it.
They were like a possession.
They were. And so, so I'm sure this life was very, very different than the one that she dreamed, as a young girl. First of all, starting with losing her parents, but then as she adapted to that and time helped heal wounds, then all of a sudden she turns into a beautiful woman. And so true, she probably, was starting to either form relationships or think about relationships, and then all of a sudden she's rounded up and taken to the kings, but she is such a beautiful example of living every day and making it a glory day. Because, and you can tell she did, because she said, if I perish, I perish. That shows you her submissiveness to God's will. And that she wasn't, not to say she never cried, but she wasn't crying in her milk and spending all the day, if only I were back in Mordecai's house. Oh, if only I were back with my parents, this would have never happened. No, she made today a glory day. She looked around and said, you know what? I must be where God wants me. Because she didn't do anything wrong. She simply had submitted herself to God's will. And so because of that, she could say, and today's going to be a glory day. I'm going to have a glory day. It's going to be a good day. And her countenance was so beautiful and wonderful. Not just the way she looked, but that inner glow that comes from the peace and joy that she had. And she obtained favor of the Chamberlain. What was his name? Hege, or something, you know, these names. And so everybody loved Esther. You know, you want to be loved by everybody? Have a beautiful countenance because you're so submitted to God and you live every day a glory day. And it just will come from inside out. Now, you know, easy to say, harder to do. But what a beautiful example of a woman that just said, not going to spend my days thinking about what used to be. Today's going to be a glory day. And she woke up every day. And King Ahasuerus saw her too and said, wow. You know, and so she, because of that, she was used to save her people. Because of that. What if she had not submitted to God? What if she had spent her time looking back in the other glory days and she didn't live every day as a glory day? Well, what would have happened is she wouldn't have been so appealing, so pleasing to the Chamberlain, wouldn't have been to the, and you know that he did extra for her. She didn't require extra. I thought that was a beautiful point too. Esther didn't require extra. She got what everybody else, and you know, and from this, she was, you know, basically asked, what else? What do you need here to go to the king? Because you got it. You know, you are such a wonderful, beautiful, great gal. I'm going to get you whatever you want. And he had the hookup. You know, he was in charge of all that. Nothing, just what I have. You know, I think that's so wonderful. You know, we can be so greedy sometimes, can't we? Or think that the grass is so greener. And she was just perfectly content with what she had. And then her submissive attitude of, if I perish, I perish, because she left it in God's hands.
She also did not have the spirit of fear, it
No,
seems like,
no.
which is amazing.
It is. It really is. And, you know, if I perish, I perish. That really is. That shows how much she trusted God with her life. You know, that makes me think of, you ever get like rabbit trail? Oh, it makes me think of this and this. Makes me think of Isaac and the trust that he had for his dad.
Yeah.
And the trust that Abraham had of God, because he said, through your son I'm going to make a great nation.
And
You know?
This Daniel that you're getting ready to talk about too.
Yeah, that's another story.
Yeah.
So to finish out Esther, she had a beautiful countenance as she lived her best life with the life that she had been given. Okay? Her best life every day, just this is what my life is, this is where God has me, and today I'm going to have a glory day. Yay. All right, and the next example is Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And I think it's great, interesting how we mix up these names, but anyway. Daniel. Daniel chapter 1. Another great book.
I like when Pastor preaches on this.
And so we're going to read Daniel 1 to 17.
Oh boy.
This one was harder to, so I decided not to jump around in this one. Daniel chapter 1, verses 1 through 17. In the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, came Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, unto Jerusalem and besieged it. Verse 2, and the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand, with part of the vessels of the house of God, which he carried into the land of Shinar, to the house of his God. And he brought the vessels into the treasure house of his God. And the king spake unto Ashpenaz, the master of the eunuchs, that he should bring certain of the children of Israel, and of the king's seed, and of the princes, children in whom was no blemish, but well favored and skillful in all wisdom, and cunning in knowledge and understanding science. Ugh. that word. I'm just no good in science. And such as had ability in them to stand in the king's palace. These are smart fellows and kids, and whom they might teach the learning and the tongue of the Chaldeans. And the king appointed them a daily provision of the king's meat and of the wine which he drank, so nourishing them 3 years, that at the end thereof they might stand before the king. This wasn't like a 2-week preparation. Wasn't a 2-month preparation, 3 years. Verse number 6, now among these were the children of Judah, Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. See, the names are different, aren't they? Verse number 7, unto whom the prince of the eunuchs gave names.
Oh, okay.
For he gave unto Daniel the name of Belteshazzar. But for some reason, we stay with Daniel with him.
Oh, that's nice.
And then to Hananiah of Shadrach, and to Mishael, Meshach, and to Azariah of Abednego. Okay, so, it's very interesting how we mix them, why we chose not to call Daniel Belteshazzar, or why we chose not to call Meshach, Mishael. So anyway, it's funny how we grab onto something, one person will, and then as the story gets told, Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. That's the way you always hear the story. So
I never heard that first part, so yeah.
it's interesting. All right, what verse am I on here? 8. But Daniel purposed in his heart. What another wonderful, wonderful phrase, which is exactly what we're talking about, purposing in our heart, that he would not defile himself with the portion of the king's meat, nor with the wine which he drank. Therefore he requested of the prince of the eunuchs that he might not defile himself. Now God had brought Daniel into favor and tender love with the prince of the eunuchs, just like Esther. And the prince of the eunuchs said unto Daniel, I fear my lord the king, who hath appointed your meat and your drink. For why should he see your faces worse liking than the children which are of your sort? Then shall you make me endanger my head to the king. The eunuch is saying, I'm in charge of taking care of you. And if you go before the king and your countenance is bad because you won't eat the food that we gave you and the wine, then I'm the one who's going to be in trouble for it. So that, and then he said, then you shall make me endanger my head to the king. His life was on the line with this. So in verse 11, then said Daniel to Melzar, whom the prince of the eunuchs had set over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, prove thy servants, I beseech thee, 10 days. Give us 10 days. And let them give us pulse to eat and water to drink. So we're not going to drink the king's meat. We're not going to drink the king's wine. Then let our countenance be looked upon before thee, and the countenance of the children that eat of the portion of the king's meat. And as thou seest, deal with thy servants. Oh, the confidence they have here, that if I do what's right, God's going to take care of the rest. Verse 14, so he consented to them in this matter and proved them 10 days. That was really a big thing for that eunuch to say, okay, I'll give you 10 days. I'll give you 10 days.
What's pulse? What's that?
Okay, so pulse is vegetable and lentils, right? Vegetables and lentils and stuff.
Okay.
And the king's meat, that stuff was offered to idols.
Okay.
And wine, he's just saying, we're not going to eat this stuff. This is against what we believe in, and we're going to take a stand.
Okay.
And they really, really did. And that eunuch said, okay, I'm going to give you 10 days that you asked for. And he really was stepping out on a limb for them. Because as he said back there, he could get killed for this. And 10 days is still 10 days. If someone came by and all of a sudden, Daniel and his boys were looking pretty rough. And then he'd lose his life. So he said, okay, I'll give you 10 days. Verse 15, and at the end of 10 days, their countenances appeared fairer and fatter in flesh than all the children which did eat the portion of the king's meat. And thus Melzar took away the portion of their meat for good, and the wine that they should drink, and he gave them pulse. Okay, the 10 days proved it, and he's like, oh, there's something to this. Okay, you guys got it. Verse 17, this is great. As for these 4 children, God gave them knowledge and skill in all learning and wisdom, and Daniel had understanding in all visions and dreams. As for these 4 children, what does that tell you?
God took
These are-
special notice of
Rewarded
it.
them.
Yep.
for
And also,
obeying.
these are not old kids. Okay, these are
Oh,
not.
yeah.
These are not old. So these boys were held captive after Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, besieged Jerusalem. And preacher had mentioned this. They likely had seen their parents die. I mean, that was very likely. They'd likely seen them die in front of them. And this was not how they thought their life would go. All of a sudden, they're being held captive. Smart, probably strong young men. And all of a sudden, they are not free to go about and do what they want. And they're not even really free to worship, but they did. They made the choice. And they had such confidence in God, and I love the confidence that's shown here. We see these young men purposing to make every day that they were alive in captivity a glory day. They didn't spend their time thinking, you think of a lot of prisoners, that's what they do, okay? They spend their time thinking about better days. And I've never been in prison, incarcerated like that. I'm sure it's hard, and it would be a battle not to spend your time looking back at better days. But what will happen? You'll waste away. You will not, instead think of, I'm just trying to bring this to, modern day stuff. Think of the prisoner who would spend his time exercising, doing push-ups, doing sit-ups, reading, that kind of thing, and moving forward, so to speak. And so that's what we see these young men doing. They said, we're going to glory in every day. We're going to have glory days now. We're going to serve you with our life. We're going to take a stand. And we have such confidence in you, God, that what will be, will be. Like Esther said, if I perish, I perish. That is really what these boys said, is, what will be, will be. And it'll be what God wants. Do we live our lives like that? Where if we're obeying, and this is the key, this is the thing, is we have to be obeying God. We have to be obeying God so that we can have that full confidence. We can't lean onto our understanding, as Proverbs says. But we've got to trust God and obey Him. And when we're obeying Him and trusting Him, we have to hold our hands up and say, if I perish, I perish. It's all in God's hands. And so we see these young men, these 4 children, the Bible describes them of. I don't know how old they were. Have you heard?
I thought they was like teenagers.
That sounds
Yeah,
right.
that's
That's
what
what
I
I've
was
heard too, like teenagers, which I think, if I'm correct, that the Bible kind of labeled maybe 18 and below. It was either 21 or 18. I can't remember which, as children. That they would. That's something for us to take a look at. But they made every day a glory day, and it's neat to see how the people in charge of them saw the difference too. And then the king sees the difference. During difficult circumstances, they decided to live their best life every day for God, and God blessed them for it, brought them into the same favor that we saw with Esther. Our last example, this is a great example, Luke chapter 1, verses 5 to 13. We're going to talk about Zechariah and Elizabeth.
I never heard of this Elizabeth.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, was she the one that couldn't?
John the Baptist.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Yep. All right, Luke chapter 1, verses 5 to 3. What am I looking at for time, someone?
No idea.
You don't have to take it off. It's
It's
okay.
about 17 minutes to.
I'm okay. I'm okay. All right.
This
Luke,
is actually reminding me of a previous lesson, whether from you or from Pastor up there, about living today, living in today, not in the past, because our God cannot use us if we're back there. We
Yep.
need to be
so
today.
good. Yep, so good. And purposeful living.
Mm-hmm.
All right, Luke 1, verse 5 says, There was in the days of Herod, the king of Judea, a certain priest named Zacharias, of the course of Abiah, and his wife was of the daughters of Aaron, and her name was Elizabeth. Verse 6, And they were both righteous before God, and it defines what righteous is, walking in all the commandments and ordinances of the Lord blameless. And verse 7, And they had no child, because that Elizabeth was barren, and they both were now well stricken in years. And it came to pass that while he executed the priest's office before God in the order of his course, according to the custom of the priest's office, his lot was to burn incense when he went into the temple of the Lord. That was his job. And the whole multitude of the people were praying without at the time of incense. And there appeared unto him an angel of the Lord standing on the right side of the altar of incense. Imagine, he goes to light the incense, and there's an angel of the Lord. And when Zacharias saw him, he was troubled, and fear fell upon him. But the angel said unto him, Fear not, Zacharias, for thy prayer is heard, and thy wife Elizabeth shall bear thee a son. Now remember, they're old and stricken in years here. Shall bear thee a son, and thou shalt call his name John. And John is the forerunner to Christ. And verse 14, And thou shalt have joy and gladness, and many shall rejoice at his birth. For he shall be great in the sight of the Lord, and shall drink neither wine nor strong drink, and he shall be filled with the Holy Ghost, even from his mother's womb. And many of the children of Israel shall he turn to the Lord their God. I went further. Okay, that's okay. Yeah, that's a good story. So notice how verse 6 says that both Zechariah and Elizabeth were righteous and walked in all the commandments of the Lord blameless. And then the next verse tells us that Elizabeth, they had no child because Elizabeth was barren. We have to understand that in Bible times, this was a mark on a lady. And it broke their heart. It was something, because it's brought out to us, okay? So that's how we know that this affected them deeply. It was brought out to us for to see. But they were righteous and walked they walked in all the commandments of the Lord blameless, okay? It's not that you can't wonder why that things happen, but you can't stay there. And you can't question God and not accept. That's what we need to do. We need to accept. We're going to question to an extent, but dwelling on that is an issue and not giving it over to the Lord. And that applies to all kinds of different areas of our life. So despite the fact that they had no child, in a day, that was a real mark on a woman, they chose to every day to walk righteously, doing what God wanted them to do. Every day they woke up. Imagine in the early years, and Sam would be okay with me sharing this because she has shared it. For 3 years, Sam and Corey tried to have a baby. And they went through many tests, many treatments, many things to try to get pregnant. And it was just hope after hope crushed. And that's what this reminds me of. But I was thinking in those early days of when they were just married or whenever they decided to try to start having a child, and the excitement and stuff, and that could be their glory days where they kept looking back going, yeah, we had so much hope then. But that's not the way it played out. There came a time, and I believe it was early on, where they gave it to God and they said, this is not what we want, but this is what you have for us. So I'm gonna make today a glory day. And they said it every day, and they walked in God's commandments and they obeyed him. And verse 11, the angel tells Zechariah that they'll have a baby. Okay? And so that's how their story played out for them. But they were righteous and walked in all the commandments of the Lord blameless, even though the circumstances were not what they would have had them to be. And our life isn't going to be. just the way that we think it should be. But remember, we don't see that whole picture beginning to end. God does. His view, he sees it all. You know, we can only see back. And to be frank, we just can't spend time looking back and thinking about what's back there. It'll keep us from moving forward. We have to move forward. So these are just a few examples of how we can make every single day a glory day. The common factors in these examples are, 1, life did not go as they had planned for Esther, the Hebrew children, and also Zacharias and Elizabeth. Bless you. Circumstances were difficult. Our life can be difficult. 2, but they continued to love God, and they lived the best life they could for him every single day. No need to keep looking back to good times in your life. Make today a good time, you know. And that's why, you know, I was watching some little meme things or something like that. My husband's looking at me. I like things that make me laugh, you know, good, wholesome things that make me laugh. I want to be that kind of person that has a good day every day, that I glory every day. Lord, this is the day you gave me. I'm going to be happy in it. I'm going to live it for you. But that takes purposeful thinking.
It does.
You know, the grouch in me wants to go. I don't want to be up. I don't feel very good. My house isn't clean, you know. And that's not the mindset that we need to have. I want to have that mindset of, let's make today a glory day when I wake up. And let's take their examples, purpose to live every day, every single day, and make every day a glory day. Ecclesiastes 3:11a says, he, speaking of God, hath made everything beautiful in his time. Everything is exactly how it should be when I'm obeying God. Despite what happens, everything is exactly as it should be when I'm obeying God. Now, I mess up the mix when I decide not to obey. But if I'm obeying God to the best of my abilities, and he knows that we mess up, if I'm obeying God, then everything is exactly as it should be. All right. Thank you to our online friends.